Alright, YouTube, there's another politician. Now, I know I said no more political videos, so I'm going to keep this apolitical and just talk about what was actually said and the religious ramifications of it. Richard, and I'm assuming it's pronounced Mourdock, it might be more accurately portrayed as Richard Mourdock. He's, of course, from Indiana. He's a Republican running for the Senate. He comes out and he pulls a Todd. He couldn't have pulled a better impression of Todd Akin. Of course, Akin got in trouble for saying in cases of legitimate rape, the woman wouldn't get pregnant because magically her body wouldn't get pregnant from it, which is bullshit, and we all know it, and now he's losing the race. Richard Mourdock came out and said that, and he's a pro-lifer, he's against a woman's right to choose, and said the one exception should be...
Avast virus database has been updated.
Yeah, Avast always updates in the middle of a video. Said that the one exception should be abortion should be legal if the woman's life is in danger. Of course, if you keep that exception, women will just injure themselves with coat hangers like they did for 100 years, and it won't work. So, he comes out and says that rape is essentially God's will. That it's a terrible circumstance, but if it happens, it's God's will, and we should, she should have the baby. And the YouTube videos of his comments are rife with people saying that Mourdock is, of course, an idiot. And, of course, there are a few apologist Republicans, and including one Australian individual for some bizarre reason, who are coming out and saying his comments were misconstrued. But you can watch the video for yourself. Just look up Richard Mourdock, that's M-O-U-R Doc, rape, and you'll find about a dozen videos of what he said. It's reprehensible. This is an individual who is morally bankrupt, doesn't understand the Christian religion even as well as most atheists do, and has an Old Testament approach to a topic which isn't even discussed in the Bible, who arbitrarily defines life as whenever the child or fetus or tissue mass or whatever you want to refer to it as is created out of one sperm and one egg. A totally arbitrary definition, by the way. You might as well say that sperm and eggs are worthy of human rights and that masturbation should be punishable by a jail term. It makes just as much sense. It's potential life. It just isn't, it's still monozygotic at the moment. It's undergone meiosis but not fertilization, but it's still life. You could also arbitrarily define life as beginning when the baby is born and say up until the baby's born you should be able to abort it. Most reasonable individuals don't take that line or the hard line of masturbation should be punishable by death, but you've got these individuals who clearly they don't even understand their religion. For instance, I've had a lot of Christians claim to me that because of gays and abortion, we are essentially living in a modern-day Sodom, that the United States is going to hell, it's going to fall from grace and collapse because we've become Sodom. If you look at Ezekiel, Sodom actually fell because they refused to take care of their poor. Now, which party, the good Bible-thumping, pious Christian GOP, or the Democratic Party, is more generally known for caring about poor people? I think you will agree that if you actually read the Bible, the GOP is the party which primarily is in error. And of course, the meaning of the word sin is to be actually in error, to be wrong in action, word, or thought. That's the original definition of sin. It didn't mean, well, you had gay sex. It meant you were wrong. But beyond that, I mean, the religious right wing in this country, they're completely deluded. And they're deluded for several reasons. Number one, they claim that abortion is wrong because the fetus or infant or whatever you want to call it has constitutional rights, the right to be kept alive. They completely ignore the constitutional rights of adults who already do have rights and already are out of the womb and functioning on their own. Why they choose one over the other and choose the one that's less likely to survive, It makes no sense to me. Secondly, they will conveniently ignore such arguments as this. Let's assume that a 10-year-old is raped by her own father and gets pregnant. The fundamental question here is not, does the fetus have the right to live? The fundamental question here is, does the government have the right to force that individual upon being raped to carry the child to term? I think most reasonable individuals will agree, no, the government does not have that right. It clearly doesn't have the right to tell citizens that they cannot undergo a perfectly safe medical procedure, which in many cases could save their life. In some cases, you have people, what if they're mentally retarded? What if they've got some sort of other mental disorder, so that they're going to spend, years in a psych ward if they go through with the pregnancy? What if they have some terrible genetic condition? What if the child is tested and found to have an unsurvivable medical condition? You are essentially saying that the government has the right to tell these individuals what they can and cannot do with their body. Now, the government has a history of doing that anyway. We see it with drugs, etc. But the difference between, and the two are sometimes likened to one another. They say, well, drugs are a bad decision too. The government has the right to tell you you can't use drugs, so we have the right to tell you you can't abort. The difference is this. If you're smoking a reefer, you could expose other people to that. By having an abortion, you're not going to cause an abortion epidemic. By having an abortion, you're not going to get someone next to you high. It totally doesn't make sense to relate the two issues in any way, shape, or form other than they're two examples of the government stepping on people's own individual liberty. But the fundamental question isn't, does the fetus have the right to live just because, well, it's a week old now, it will be alive in the future. It doesn't have any brain function. It can't survive outside of the womb. It doesn't have nerves. It has no real tissue differentiation. It doesn't even resemble anything you would consider a human being. It's the size of a pea or a grape, but it has these rights magically. There's no pain in aborting it. It can't feel pain. It doesn't have any neurons, but abortion's still wrong. Meanwhile, the mother, who might be a 10-year-old rape victim, who might be a mentally retarded rape victim, who might have some sort of terrible medical condition that will leave her sterile for the rest. What if an 8-year-old gets raped and will be sterile for the rest of their life because they go through with the pregnancy? Now, am I saying these people should have the right to keep the baby if they want? Have you thought, and the Republican line, especially the Bible-thumping Republican line, and I will tell you this will be unpopular what I'm about to say. Most Republican politicians would support abortion if it weren't for the evangelists that fund their campaigns. Most Republican politicians are college graduates. Most of them are deists, agnostics, atheists, and moderate Christians. They are moderate Catholics and liberal Catholics. They have nothing in common with the 33% of the GOP that's composed of ignorant, backwoods, Neanderthal Bible thumpers. They pander to these individuals to get votes, and then when they get into office, many of them attempt not to even bring up the issue. What you see in the track records is a very small number of truly evangelical politicians from extremely evangelical regions of the country who form these bills and co-sponsor these bills, bully others into co-sponsoring these bills, and then put them to the general vote, where the others are forced to vote for them or they lose their backing. The Republican Party has, in essence, of no fault of its own, been completely hijacked by these individuals because they have a huge amount of money. These megachurch, if you want votes, and you're in Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, West Virginia or something, the easiest way to get votes is just to pander to the evangelicals. You've got a megachurch with 50,000 people in it. You can reach 50,000 people and get their votes almost lock, stock, and barrel just by being more anti-abortion and anti-gay than your opponent is. And the Republicans typically are the ones that bow to that. There have been evangelical Democrats, though, as well. They have existed. For instance, Bill Clinton with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He was pandering to the Southern voters he got in the first place because he was from the South. That's why he put it in place. Anyone who thinks that he actually believed in that ethos is wrong. Of course he didn't. And most of the Republican politicians don't. They're being panderers. They have no choice. In a way, it's almost pathetic and sad to see them do this. But this is an individual, this Mourdock person, who really does honestly seem to believe these things. And he's coming from Indiana. He's coming from a predominantly Republican state. He's coming from a predominantly Republican location to begin with at birth. He's coming from this sick, twisted, perverted ethos among the fundamentalists, that they have the only moral system that works, that their views are unchallengeable because they're dominated by the power of God. And yet they completely ignore the more moderate or liberal Christian groups and consider their version of Christianity, not even Christianity itself, but purely their version of Christianity, better and more adequate at explaining the way of God than these other groups. And it's a perversion. It's sick. I will give most Christians credit. Most Catholics believe in the right to abort. Most Catholics believe in the right to contraception. But we have these individuals like Aiken or Mourdock who are held hostage or of their own free will put forth these stupid bills one after the other as though their only point in being in office was to stamp out the rights of women and gays. And I would ask any female who happens to watch this video why you would possibly vote for somebody who believes that you are cattle and that your body is essentially property of the state. It makes no sense. Even if you do support life over choice, even if you are generally against the idea of aborting, or you wouldn't even do it yourself, do you believe that society and the government has the right to dictate that moral doctrine to other groups of people? Because you know what? There are a lot of groups throughout history, and even in the modern world, who have no problem with abortion. It almost makes the GOP look worse than the Taliban when you consider that even the most staunch Muslims in the world, the most evangelical Muslims, support abortion. They actually have no problem with abortion because they believe that until the child takes its first breath, it isn't life and has no spirit. It may have the physical traits of life at 8 months, but it doesn't have the breath of life. It doesn't have the spirit. That's what they believe. So you've got a 1.2 billion people right there who have absolutely no problem with abortion. I've never seen a Hindu bring up the topic of abortion. I don't know what they believe on the topic. I would assume it differs from location to location, depending on how orthodox the Hinduism is. There are many groups around the world that see abortion as either a logical, necessary evil, or as something that really has no moral turpitude behind it whatsoever. And yet you've got these moral extremists, which are essentially the American Taliban, in the evangelical movement, who come out and say that anyone who disagrees with them is an unpatriotic socialist murderer, essentially. That if you support a woman's right to choose, you're basically a murderer. In reality, these individuals themselves are the ones that are morally perverted. They don't understand their Bible. They don't understand their Christian moral doctrine very well. They're uneducated. They've never taken theology. They listen to whatever their megachurch pastor tells them is the truth, and they go forth and they do the will of the church. They don't even have a thinking mind. And because of their sheer numbers and their high reproductive rate, because they are like cockroaches in many aspects, they do reproduce at a higher rate than the general population, although most of their children become rabid atheists, which is hilarious. Because of that, they've managed to essentially take control of one of the political parties in the United States. I can't remember who it was, but there was actually a prominent Republican in the progressive era in the 60s who came out and said, "Woe unto our party if it gets taken over by the Bible thumpers." And I will put a link to the picture because I actually have it in the description. So Mourdock there, Mourdock, just an absolute asshole, just like Todd Aiken. Why people vote for these individuals, I have no clue. Peace out.